This is good, or this is better?
It's better.
This is better?
Let's just take a moment to settle ourselves into the class. Let the outside conversations and thoughts and distractions be set behind. Okay, we'll begin with some opening prayers like usual. So on page 34 of this golden book, we'll recite the refuge and Bodhicitta prayer 3 times in Tibetan, and then once in English. And then we'll recite the 4 immeasurables in English, 7 limb prayer in English. And we can offer a mandala in Tibetan. And then we'll offer praise to Shakyamuni in English. Sangye Shiran Sokye Shonam La Tantu Badu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jin Sokye Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sangye Druparsho Sangye Shiran Sokye Shonam La Tantu Badu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jin Sokye Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sangye Druparsho Sangye Shiran Soki Shornam La Shanshu Pardu Dagni Kyapsushi Dagi Jin Soki Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sangye Druparsho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain at the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to great enlightenment. Yo Ramri Ravi Sange Shindu Mi Te Ori Namah Idam Guranamandalakam Niyatayami. Okay, I'm turning to page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti plan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Thus 3 like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Thank you for joining me this evening. Funny, I always have, in any center I go to, a doubt, how long should our preliminary prayers be? You know, when I was first attending Buddha Center, we do 25, maybe 30 minutes sometimes, preliminary prayers, then 20 minutes at the end of closing prayers. So it was in a 2-hour session, almost half of it was just prayers. You know? And Geshe was very insistent, it's just important to help ripen our minds, prepare our minds. So whatever teaching we received, we'd already done the work to prepare our minds to receive that teaching in a meaningful way. I think also we knew that maybe many of the students didn't have a daily practice as much as they said they wanted to have. So he tried to inject a little bit of it, And but at the time, there was one nun who did a many, but was Umse most of the time, an American nun. And I started Umseing for a while, since before I was ordained. And the only question Geshe Tsoga had when I started Umseing was, does he do a beautiful job at the tunes? Because for him, he said, if we're going to sit through 30 minutes of prayers, then they should be something that the people have some sort of attraction to, and not just dry and flavorless. And so, Ani Yeshe, the nun who was there, said, yeah, he's okay. She had her PhD in Harvard in music theory. So for someone to be the Unze, to have a PhD in music theory, was a little bit intimidating. But so anywhere I go, I wonder, is this too many prayers? Is it going to be too boring for people? But then I say, prayers are dedications to the Buddha. So they can't be boring. So it's a balance of trying to find what's the right amount.
Complain when you'll be surprised. Oh, that teacher, he doesn't do all the prayers. Another teacher does all the prayers. The reverse also complain.
Yeah, it's too, I think this was one.
No, I'm not. You're gonna find people unhappy no matter what you do. So you have to find the balance of saying, okay, well, what for me, when I'm leading a session, depending on how big the audience is and how level if they're brand new students or not, you say, what prayers do we need to do? Because what's the point of these prayers? So what's our main point of these prayers? When we do prayers at the beginning of a teaching session, what's the main point?
Focus your mind. Prepare your mind for teaching. Set a motivation.
Okay, so that's one of the biggest ones, right? Is setting a motivation.
Right? Frame of mind.
Right. So exactly, we want to set a motivation that's really important. And so sometimes you'll even explain that motivation outside of the prayers as well, right? But the prayers help us set a motivation. That's why refuge and bodhicitta are always first. But then just in general, frame our mind to prepare for the teaching, right? Open up our mind to receive it. It's always good to remind ourselves at any teaching that we attend, to avoid the abandon the three faults of a faulty vessel, right? But to become a worthy vessel to receive the teachings as they're taught in the long run. And I constantly remind myself of these teachings because a lot of time I'll receive a teaching or I'll go to receive a teaching and it's something I've already studied, right? And then you say, well, I've already studied this. Why am I studying it again? But then you say, that's not the right way to ever approach the Dharma because there's always new things to learn in the Dharma, right? And so if I have the mindset, I've already studied this, I don't need to study this again. That's a big problem, So when we start with prayers, one, help prepare our minds in general to receive teachings and to practice. And two, to set a strong motivation. But then today we include the mandala, right? Mandala request to request that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas help clear away the obstacles to our study. They help increase our virtuous minds, and they help decrease our negative minds, right? So in general, when you make requests of the merit field, and you make requests of all the lineage lamas, that's what you're requesting. These three things, right? For them to get rid of obstacles to your practice, to increase your positive minds, and to decrease your harmful minds. So that helps make our practice more rounded. So today we're concluding our study of this prayer, the hymn to the Buddha, or the prayer in 150 verses by Matrceta or by Ashwagosha. And so I have a question. So you three have been at every one of the teachings. Well, Shantala missed the first one. That's okay. She's occupied on the other side of Bangalore. And that's a whole day journey. But, so the question is, this text is only 152 verses long. Outside of our Saturday classes, how often have you looked at this text or recited any of the verses? None. None. So why are we studying the text? I'm not criticizing anyone, right? But we're a small class here and we're more senior students. So why are we studying a text if we're not practicing it? Because I'll be honest, I recited these verses outside of class only because I was preparing and reading through hundreds or tens and dozens of pages of commentary. But if I wasn't preparing, I probably wouldn't have either, because I have my own practice that I do every day. But this is a beautiful prayer, right? Beautiful prayer, composed in Sanskrit, translated into Tibetan really beautifully. And then the English, well, I do have some problems with the meaning of some verses. It's very nice sounding, right? It's very pleasant to speak. And it's very motivating. And it has so much meaning embedded in it. And we don't practice it. And the reason I bring this up is because this last chapter is called Praise of Freedom from Debt. Okay. And so here when we talk about debt in two ways. It's talking about whether the Buddha owes a debt to sentient beings and what debt we owe to the Buddha, right? And so the short version is most of the verses are saying the Buddha has worked tirelessly with great effort for all sentient beings. So he has no debt that he owes to any sentient beings because he's given the holy Dharma teachings and he's given his body and he's given everything to sentient beings. So that he owes no debt. And many of the verses are talking about the ways in which the Buddha does not owe any debt to sentient beings. But so the flip side of that is, and it says, I can never repay you. That means we're in debt to the Buddha, right? So what does it mean to be in debt to the Buddha or to owe something to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas? So do we feel in our lives that we're in debt to the Buddha or to our teachers or to the Bodhisattvas? What does that mean? What does that mean to you, that feeling, the idea of being in debt to them?
You feel that no matter how much you practice, you can't actually repay the debt. Sometimes it feels like
So,
gurus.
Right, it's difficult, right?
Other time I just shut down and don't think about it.
Well, so how do we repay the debt? First of all, that's the question.
Compassion towards all other beings, sentient beings. That's the best way to, besides the practice of the Dharma, the active practice is showing compassion and love to other sentient beings.
Right, so
That's exactly what we want.
we practice the teachers we practice the teachings, right? We put the teachings into practice, right? That's how we repay. So I agree, Shantila. A lot of times I feel, and the language in these is I can never repay this debt, right? And so until you become a Buddha and can perfectly work for the betterment of all sentient beings to remove them from suffering, we said we haven't repaid that debt. That's at least the way this language is. But that can be overwhelming to think that I can never repay it. So we say, what am I doing? I'm doing the best I can every day to practice Dharma. And that is not only improving my mind, that is not only helping other sentient beings, but what that's doing is repaying the incredible kindness of my teachers and of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have put the holy Dharma in place. And that's how I repay that debt. And I repay it one day at a time, one piece by piece. Because it's not like it's a debt they're ever going to call in, right? It's never like we have to pay it all by tomorrow, or they're going to break our kneecaps or something. It's not like a gambling debt, right? It's a practice. And so that debt, that commitment, is just recognizing how incredibly kind all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are, and even more so how incredibly kind our direct teachers are, our root like Kyabje, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and his Holiness Dalai Lama, and other teachers you've had a chance to meet. Even kinder than the Buddha, because we get to see them face to face. But then the best way to repay their debt is to take what they teach and put it into practice. And so for me, it helps reminding myself of that whenever I'm doing something frivolous and I'm not thinking of the Dharma in a meaningful way. I say, how am I repaying this incredible gift I've been given? And am I wasting? Which isn't to say don't have fun. It isn't to say don't go to the movies, don't do other things. It's to say that everything we do with a Dharma mind, right? So even if we need to go to the movies and blow off steam, you can do that with Dharma mind, right? Without a mind full of attachment and desire, And so one of the motivations for my practice is remembering how incredibly kind my teachers have been in this life and in past lives, and realizing that I owe them something. And that owing them isn't a burden, right? Because what I owe them is my practice of Dharma. And my practice of Dharma is what liberates me from samsara. So I owe them my liberation. That's what I owe. I owe them my virtue. I owe them all the things in my life that have brought me happiness. That is how I repay them, is with my happiness, with my practice. And so that's something that comes up again and again in this verse, and these short verses in this final chapter. And so it's something I think about, this text, we're studying it, but do we do anything outside of Saturday when we read it? And on one hand, being able to read a new text is wonderful. You learn how to study texts. You learn all the different meanings from the text. And maybe you apply little bits and pieces, right? You don't have to recite something every day to apply the teachings. But if you think about, why am I doing this? How am I using this to become closer to Buddhahood? And so I think that's what we're thinking about whenever we study. Okay. So with that very strong critique, sorry, it's worth thinking about, we'll begin looking at the last few verses. There aren't many. Okay. So, I know not how to repay you for what you have done. Even those who have attained nirvana are still in your debt. So here, what you've done, it really says for your kindness. So even those who have attained nirvana, so that's pointing, and that goes into the next verse. Those beings such as Shariputra and others who have escaped samsara, but they haven't entered into the Mahayana path. They haven't become bodhisattvas, so they're resting in the bliss of nirvana, right? They're resting in peace, but they're not working for other sentient beings. So even then, they haven't repaid the debt they owe to the Buddha, because they haven't committed their life to helping other sentient beings in that way, Established in the Dharma by you, they accomplished their own welfare only. But you worked for yourself. You worked by yourself for the welfare of all. So how can you be repaid for that? So here, it actually says, establishing your Dharma. Right? So all of those who have been established in your Dharma, who abide in your Dharma, they have worked only for their own benefit, which is to say they've worked on one of the lower vehicle paths. But you work for the benefit of all. And here, what it actually says in the Tibetan is, for the benefit of even those, and for all others, you grow weary. And what that means is, you ceaselessly practice, explain the Dharma, and ceaselessly teach the Dharma to us. That's constantly what you do. All the Buddha did was teach by his word, body, speech, and mind, right? Every action was teaching. So what can we do to repay that? How can we repay that?
Pay it forward.
Pay it forward, exactly. I mean, that's what we say, well, that's what we're doing, right? What are we doing here tonight is repaying the Buddhas for their kindness. We're coming together to study the teachings and to try to learn about the path and to learn new ways to bring the path into our everyday life, right? That is how we repay the Buddhas, by doing this work, And it can't stay in here, obviously, right? We have to bring it into our everyday life. But, Choe Khor Sum, you have to study and then contemplate and then meditate. You have to learn the material, then work out all the details, think about it, and then meditate on it. And by doing that, we bring it into our everyday lives. So if we don't come together to study, then we can't get to the contemplation or meditation, right? So we have to do these things. So even by coming today, I'm repaying the Buddhas, And that's one of those ways, especially when you can say, it's another Saturday evening. I have to go to the Dharma Center again. What a great chance to repay the Buddhas, And I've definitely had that feeling. Working at the SBC, I would go to, all the teachings that would happen during the week, and I'd organize all of them, do the prayers for all of them, and I'd prepare, set up the bumper for all of them. And when you're doing 3 or 4 a week, and you're living at the center, you're just like, okay, going to another one. That feeling can come up, right? It's very easy to, especially when, it's a small center and you're somewhere like Bangalore, which is so difficult to get here. You have to exert so much effort to get here that it's easy to feel a little defeated sometimes. Then you can think, this is how I repay the Buddhists. This is what I'm doing. All the incredible kindness my teachers have shown me, I'm repaying it right now. That's what I'm doing with my life right now. And that makes it very meaningful. So in that way, it's great motivation to practice. It continues, you look upon those who slumber and you gently awaken them. You are a kind and heedful friend to those who are heedless. So you look upon those who slumber. This is in two ways. One, you look upon those who have achieved nirvana or liberation from samsara, and they rest in that peace. So they're slumbering in peace, but not working for others. And very gently, in the words of the Buddha, pull them out of the peace of nirvana and put them onto the Mahayana path. But also, you look upon those who slumber due to the sleep of ignorance, right? So it's all sentient beings. All sentient beings have a wisdom mind that's blocked by the sleep of delusion, right? So by awakening us from the sleep of delusion and awakening our wisdom mind, then that's what the Buddha's words are doing. You gently awaken them, So you pull them out of their ignorance, very gently. Of course, we've seen some teachings, right, that are very harsh and very strict, because the teachings are meeting the needs of the students. That's why it says you are a kind and heedful friend. So first off, to those who are heedless. So what the term here, heedless and heedful, often is translated as conscientious and non-conscientious, Mātṛceṭa and Mātṛceṭa. And it says the reason in this case that the Buddha is considered heedful is because he has the matured fruit that is only ripened from the root of virtue, of stainless virtue, that he doesn't ever depart from. And those who are heedless are those who don't abide in virtue. Right? This is this is one of the mental factors that's most interesting to me. Non-conscientiousness. Because at least when I think about it in English, non-conscientiousness seems like it's not an active thing, right? It's like my not paying attention to something is how you would describe not being conscientious. But you look at a lot of the vows we have, especially when you have the monastic vows, and a lot of them, the motivation for them is non-conscientiousness. In order for that vow to be completely broken, that's the motivation. So you say, how can that be an active motivation for something, right? Your lack of being aware, your lack of conscientiousness is actually an active mind. It's not just missing something. It's not just you're not paying attention. It's an active mind that is non-conscientious of what's happening around you, not paying attention to the situation. So some of the monastic vows that have that as a motivation have to do with, a lot of the monastic vows, for instance, what their goal is to not engage in such behavior that would cause lay people to lose faith in the Dharma, right? That's why the monks have 253 vows. A lot of them kind of fall into a category like that. So it's a behavior that I might be doing. For instance, when I eat food, it says when you eat food, and then you have to imagine the early monastic community were all eating, they're being offered food by lay people. So they're visiting houses of the people that are offering food, right? And don't make the sounds and chi when you eat your food. So it's basically like, don't look like a pig in a slog, right? Because doing that would cause lay people to lose faith in the Dharma. But so the motivation for that is non-conscientiousness. So not being aware of the circumstances, but in an active way, not a passive way. So those who are heedless here, we say, those who are heedless, the commentary says those who do not abide in virtue. But also, what does it mean not to abide in virtue? Because we all strive for virtue, yet our minds are filled with delusions, right? So since our minds are filled with delusions, we are constantly engaging in non-virtuous action. Does that mean we don't abide in virtue? Even if we're doing our best?
It means we don't take sufficient often.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. You don't take sufficient respect or interest in maintaining your house.
Well, exactly. So,
Not
but so,
mindful.
well, exactly. But so that's what I'm saying is so that when we're doing our best and we still have negative minds, right? That's not the same thing as not paying attention and having a negative mind, right? So to not abide in virtue doesn't mean that every single action we do is pure virtue, because we're suffering sentient beings who live in samsara. So we're not there yet that every action is pure virtue. We still have non-virtuous minds. But if we're doing our best to live in virtue, then we're being mindful of it. Then we have a conscientious mind. So then we could say we're not being heedless in that way. But then in the same respect, what does it mean to be a friend to someone who is heedless? So the Buddha, it says, you look upon those, they say the Buddha is looking upon every single suffering sentient being at all times, right? And is a friend to those who are heedless. So even those who aren't putting in the effort, whether they're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, those who are under suffering from the delusions and karma, right? The Buddha does everything he can to help them. So what does it mean in our lives to be friends to those who are heedless, to be friends to those who are non-conscientious? You know?
Don't give alcohol to an alcoholic.
Well, that's one thing, right?
That's an extreme, but sometimes you can just let it go. Some people you just let them go. You shouldn't go on correcting the person.
Don't be too critical, be motivated, be positive, you know.
Well, these are, yeah, exactly. We have to,
Encourage them into the.
yeah. I mean, well, exactly. We should be encouraging. We have to know when it's appropriate to kind of give instruction to people and when it is a bit more important to like back off, right? But I just mean in general, we think also if someone is non-conscientious, what does that mean? And if we're trying to be friends to those who are non-conscientious, it means that we look at those who are suffering and we still do our best to help them, even if they're engaging in harmful behavior. Now, the way we help them may be different, right? Depending on the circumstances, right? We have to assess the situation and say, what is the best I can do in this situation? But it's saying that we shouldn't just be friends with our other Dharma friends who are practicing and with other people who are already like, you know, examples of great virtue. We need to be friends to everyone, which is to say we have to help all sentient beings who are suffering. So in what ways is the Buddha free from debt? The Buddha is free from debt because you have declared the destruction of the defilements. You have exposed Mara's delusions. You have taught the evils of samsara, and you have revealed the place without fear. So the Buddha declared the destruction of the defilements, right? He explained the antidotes to the defilements. The main defilements being the three root poisons of ignorance, anger, attachment, right? So the Buddha taught that the main antidotes to those are meditating on, in terms of attachment, you meditate on what is unpleasant, right? So you, especially the body, both the external body and internal body, what is unpleasant, that helps get rid of your attachment. And then for anger, you meditate on love, right? We often say that patience is one of the best antidotes to anger, and it is. But what the Buddha taught is, as another meditative practice, you meditate on love, and that's the antidote to anger. And then the antidote to ignorance is meditating on, I mean, there are many of them, but the 12 links of interdependent origination, right? Emptiness in general, but the 12 links. And so these are the antidotes he taught. So he taught the destruction of the defilements. He taught the actual way that we can destroy all polluted minds. And we can also say that ultimately, the path of seeing and the path of meditation, those are like the condensed antidote to all delusions. But if we want to break it down, he taught these three. You have exposed Mara's delusions. We talk about the four Maras, I think the last time I was here. But here, I think it's important to remember that the Maras, when they appear to us, they don't always appear as unpleasant. That's why they're so difficult to overcome, right? They can be quite pleasant. They can be quite tempting, you know, quite seductive. And so when what we have to learn to do is identify the Maras, as we said, right? Identify those dangerous and harmful minds. And when we can identify them, then we can see them as a source of terror, right? Not as a source of seduction. And that allows us to, as soon as we see them arise, we realize they're not going to do anything but harm us. And the Buddha taught us how to do that and how to overcome them, And we use a meditative concentration practice to defeat the Maras. But we have to identify them, not just the unpleasant ones or the unpleasant moments, but also the pleasant moments that are also Maras, that are also delusions. The way we do that is through mindfulness and introspection. These are the two most powerful ways, right? So mindfulness and introspection are the tools that allow us to see when the Maras arise, see when negative thoughts arise, right? So the distinction between mindfulness and introspection, both of them are guarding the mind and looking for distractions. Mindfulness, we tend to say, is trying to make sure that your mind is staying on whatever object it's focused on. So that's how mindfulness works. So it's trying to search for the object and make sure that your mind is staying on it. And introspection, what that is doing is that it's like guarding the gate of the cave to see when the distractions are coming. So it's two ways to stay focused. One is actually looking at the object and saying, am I remembering the object? Am I staying focused on this object? And the other one is saying, what kind of disturbing thoughts are arising and where are they coming from? So you have these two minds kind of always active, and what they let us do, so those on their own, they don't get rid of the delusions. But what they do is they let us see when we're under the control of the delusions, when the delusions have arisen. And so mindfulness, abiding in the equanimity of introspection, is a state that allows us to see more clearly when our mind has come under the sway of the delusions, which then, once we know that, we've already practiced the different ways, the different antidotes, right? Such as love, compassion, meditating on unpleasantness, things like this. So mindfulness and introspection are alerting us to the Mara's presence when they arise. And you have taught, really it says, you have taught the nature of samsara is frightening. So it says here you've taught the evils of samsara, but I think a more accurate translation might be, you have taught that the nature of samsara is frightening. Koe ranshin, so the nature of samsara, mise japa. You've explained the nature of samsara to be like exhausting and terrifying. And the reason that's important is because then you've revealed a place that is without fear. So what is that? That's liberation. Both liberation from samsara and the perfect and bliss and happiness of Buddhahood. So one of the ways that the Buddha is not in debt to sentient beings is because he has taught us how to overcome the deluded minds. What are the antidotes? And he's taught us the means to recognize when the deluded minds are arising, so we know when to apply the antidotes. And he's taught us that all of the things in samsara itself is the nature of suffering. It has the nature of suffering. So all these perfections we experience in samsara are still deluded minds. So by teaching us this, he's taught us then there's a way outside of that suffering. There's a place where we don't have to fear the delusions because we've conquered them. And so since he's taught this in this way, he doesn't owe anything to sentient beings. The verses continue, those who work for the welfare of the world and those of compassionate heart, what could they do wherein you have not already led the way? So this verse, this whole chapter is pretty self-explanatory, but so this is just again praising the incredible actions of the Buddha, right? Saying we can see many examples of people in our lives who are phenomenal, who have done great things to help people, both in a worldly sense and in a spiritual sense, right? And you might know philanthropists who have made great contributions to science or to ending poverty or things like this, and then spiritual teachers who have taught many people. But we say, no matter what we experience, what great virtue people have done, how could they do more than the Buddha has already done, right? The Buddha has already led the way. He has taught the path. And so all of the virtue and positive actions that we see are just following in the footsteps of the Buddha. That's not to diminish them. That's not to say they're not important. That's not to say we shouldn't try our best to do it. It's to show in one other way that the Buddha is free from debt from sentient beings because his actions have been so amazing that no matter what anyone else does, they pale in comparison to what it means to actually teach the Holy Dharma. And not just teach it, like have this conversation we're having, but actually be the first being in this degenerate age to lay out the teachings in full, right? To actually establish the Holy Dharma. So it goes on. If your good qualities could be given to others, surely you would have shared them all, even with Devadatta, right? So this is one of the most important points we say about the Dharma, is that the Buddha can't eliminate our suffering, and he can't give us his realization, which he said over and over again, right? And if he could, we'd all be Buddhas already, right? No one would be suffering. If the Buddha had the power to remove our suffering, we wouldn't be suffering. Right? That's how we know he's not actually omnipotent, right? And so even with Devadatta, so Devadatta is Buddha's cousin who at one point tried to kill him and was always kind of fighting, causing a problem, and he caused one of the first schisms in the Sangha of devotees, right? So even with someone who harmed the Buddha or tried to harm the Buddha would give him everything, would give away all of his good qualities if he could. And so what more could we ask of the Buddha if he's given everything? And here, when it actually says your good qualities, I mean, that's a fine translation. That's like the interpretation, but the word is just Dharma. If your Dharma could be given to others. So the word Dharma, as you know, has many, many meanings, right? It can be, living in India, you've heard the term over and over again, right? And it has so many meanings. But so the interesting thing is that the term in the Tibetan here is Dharma. So if your Dharma could be given to others, surely you would have shared them with all. So it's not meaning your teachings, it's meaning your characteristics, which is why they translated it this way, to kind of avoid confusion. But it's just interesting to think about. Because it's broader than just your good qualities, what does it mean to have compassion for all sentient beings? We say that all the time, right? May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. Right? But what does it actually mean to try to practice a compassion that is equal towards all sentient beings? Not just those we know, not just those we're already close to. I mean, when you really think about it, it's mind-boggling to try to think of what it would look like to live in your life, to have equal levels of compassion for all sentient beings, every single one. Whether they're the beggars on the street that are harassing you as you try to walk down the street, or whether they are your family members, or whether they are people you work with, or strangers you've never met. What does it actually mean to have equal compassion for all of them? And we're suffering sentient beings. It's hard for us to actually practice equal compassion, and we have to be smart. If every time you see someone who's unhoused or who's a beggar, you just give them all your money, that's not using wisdom with your compassion, right? So we can't say that the easy way is just to give anything anyone ever asks for, you give it to them, that's compassion. No, right? We know that. We have to live in the world, and we have to use wisdom to combine, to modulate our compassion. But what does it actually mean to try to have equal compassion for your friends and your family and your enemies? For those people that harm you and say bad things about you, who, tear down your reputation. For those people who harm others, what does it really mean to practice compassion for them? We say it all the time. May all sentient beings, all mother sentient beings. It's my favorite phrase. But actually practicing it is really hard, and even thinking about it is really hard. Like thinking about what it means, never mind like all sentient beings. Just think about how many humans there are on this earth. And it's a number so big, your mind can't actually think about it, right? There comes a point in numbers where our minds aren't able to actually comprehend what they mean, which is why people don't really like, in general, the difference between a millionaire and a billionaire is like mind-bogglingly different, right? But our brains aren't equipped to deal with the fact that like the difference between $100 million and $1 billion is insane, and therefore billionaires should be illegal, basically, right? Because the numbers are too big. right? The numbers are just too big to think about it. So it's the same way with sentient beings. Never mind sentient beings, human beings on Earth. How many, there are? We try to think about having equal compassion for all of them. That's a huge, huge task. So even when I think I'm doing a good job of practicing compassion, I just remember I can barely hold in my mind the idea of the number of monks I live with at my monastery. Never mind the number of people that live in Karnataka. Never mind the number of Indians. Never mind all people living in Asia. Never mind all human beings. So all sentient beings is so huge. So I really have to work on my meditation to really develop equanimity that doesn't distinguish between stranger, friend, and enemy. Because that's the only way I can really develop compassion for all sentient beings. Because the idea of infinite sentient beings is so mind-boggling, so hard to wrap my head around. And we really need to work hard to break down the distinction between how I feel towards those who are quote unquote enemies and those who are friends, right? The labels that I project. So that comes from developing equanimity, right? Which is why when you develop bodhicitta, the first step generally in the practice of developing bodhicitta is meditating on equanimity for that reason. Because in order to even wrap your mind around all sentient beings, it's too big, But the Buddha is constantly observing every single sentient being. In the commentaries for this, actually the previous verse, when it says you look upon them, it says 3 times every morning and 3 times every evening. The Buddha is constantly observing every single sentient being. So that's what we need to be trying to do. And now there's another verse here that is not in the English. And the reason that the translator, or rather Venerable Dhammika, he said in his introduction that the translator from the Sanskrit mentioned he thought this verse may not be original because the Sanskrit was a little bit different sounding, and therefore he chose not to include it. But we might as well include it because it goes with the verse 140. And so that verse is, I'll just do it in English, I guess it's easier. That is why, O protector of wandering beings, you definitively explained that here one does not govern another, as if expounding grammar. So what that means is, you explained it as if expounding grammar. You explained in very clear and direct ways that here, meaning in samsara, there's one does not govern another. There's no mutual doers or creators or workers, which is to say that you are subject to your own karma that you created, and that alone. And so no one else is able to create positive karma and give it to you, and no one else is able to take negative karma away from you, right? So there's no, they say one does not govern another, meaning no matter what I do, I cannot remove your karma, and I can't give you my realization. And you taught that in a direct and clear way that's easy to understand. So you taught it as if expounding grammar. So in a clear way that is without subtlety even. Out of compassion for the world, you promoted the good Dharma for so long on earth. Many disciples have you raised, capable of working for the welfare of the world. So really of the 3 worlds, he says. So out of compassion for the world, again, for all sentient beings, you promoted the good Dharma, the holy Dharma. So you've actually established the Dharma. And you've raised disciples capable of working for the welfare of others. So this line is what I think is most important to me. It's saying that the Buddha did, through his teachings, instruct in such a way that we can repay the debt we owe the Buddha, and we can work for the benefit of others, right? That is within our skill, because the Buddha has taught in such a way that we have those tools and those techniques. So it says, many personal converts have you trained, Subhadra being the last. What still remains of your debt to living beings? So here, converts, it really says direct students. I don't know why they chose, I guess the meaning is converts. That's the interpretation. They say that on the Buddha's deathbed, when he was showing the aspect of passing away, before entering into parinirvana, there was a layperson named Subhadra, who was the last layperson to receive teaching, or excuse me, not layperson, a non-Buddhist to receive teachings and then be converted to Buddhism through the Buddha's final teachings. So the last kind of non-Buddhist to receive direct teachings from the Buddha, and as a result become one of his followers, was named Subhadra. And so that's why they translated this as convert. But the word for that's commonly translated as student, at least in Tibetan, is duja, which means the one to be tamed. Something or someone to be tamed is a student. So one of the interpretations of the word student is someone who has to be tamed. And it's the same word we use for Vinaya. The word for Vinaya in Tibetan is dua, right? So dua is taming, is calming, is controlling. And duja is a thing that has to be tamed. So that's what all of us are, because we're under the control of our delusions. So we need to tame the deluded mind, right? That's what it means. And the way we do that is by studying. And so we are objects to be tamed through the teachings of the Buddha and the discourse of our teachers. And so since you have established the holy Dharma, what left is there of your debt to living beings? Right? We say of the three refuge, the Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel, the actual refuge, right, is the Dharma. That's the actual refuge. So since you have established the holy Dharma, then the Buddha has no other debt that he could possibly have to living beings, because that's so profound and so earth-shattering that there's nothing else that could supersede that. And then to explain that a little more, the way he established the Dharma, it goes on in 10 more verses. Powdering your bones in tiny pieces with the diamond of concentration, which is to say, with the Vajra, the concentration, the Vajra-like concentration. Powdering your bones in tiny pieces with the diamond of concentration, even in the end, you continue to do what was hard to do. My Dharma body and my physical body both exist only for the sake of others. Speaking thus, even in Nirvana, you taught this reluctant world. So here, what it's referencing is that we recognize that there's many different bodies of the Buddha we talk about, right? But if we divide it into two, we say the form body and the Dharma body. The Dharma body includes all the teachings of the Buddha, in this case, is what it's meaning here. And so even when the Buddha passed away, he left behind relics. So even as his physical body was no longer active in this earth, he left behind remnants of it that were holy objects that can help develop faith and devotion and can help people practice the path. But more important than that, he established the Dharma body. So he established the teachings of the Dharma. So my Dharma body and my physical body. So the Buddha gave every single part of his continuum for the benefit of others. And so it says you continue to do what was hard to do, which is to say you did not abandon or forsake suffering sentient beings. So even when you had the chance to just abide in nirvana, to abide in like the Hinayana nirvana, which is free from all from all suffering, right? Because you've abandoned the self-grasping mind and all delusions. You could have done that, but instead, you work to benefit others and achieve complete Buddhahood, right? So we say that to become an arhat, you abandon all delusions. But to become a Buddha, you have to abandon the imprints of those delusions as well, the imprints of ignorance, right? But when you abandon all delusions, then you're resting in the bliss of nirvana. The Buddha could have chosen to do that, right? But he chose not to. So he didn't give up on or forsake suffering sentient beings, even when he had that opportunity. And so, the Buddha gave everything. He said both bodies are sentient beings. So I think, what am I giving to sentient beings? The Buddha gave his body, both his physical body and his Dharma body, his mind, right? So how am I serving sentient beings? How can I give everything to sentient beings? And can I do that in a healthy way that isn't diminishing me, right? It's easy when you do a lot of these teachings to say, to give up everything, to say like, I'm nothing, I'm useless, I don't work hard enough, I'm not a good student, and then like use that to beat yourself up. That's not what this is about, right? But I still say, like, without beating myself up, maintaining a mind of rejoicing when I see all the virtue I do actively participate in and create, how can I continually give myself to others in body, speech, and mind? You know, one of my favorite images of the Buddha, and what I have on my altar, and His Holiness often upholds as very praiseworthy, is the image of the Buddha after he was practicing asceticism near the Naranja banks in the forest, where he was only eating a grain of rice a day and so forth. So you have one of the images here. So you've all seen that image. I don't know if we have one here, but he's skeletal, right? And you see all his veins and all his bones and his ribs, exactly. And the Dharma says, it's a really profound image to have as a focus of your meditation. And on the one hand, he wasn't practicing what we now think of as the Dharma, right? He was practicing an extreme, so it wasn't bringing him to liberation. So he's not saying that you should practice in that way. But at that time, the Buddha was showing us this display of being so dedicated to be free from suffering, he was willing to go to that extent. So even though we know that that practice wasn't actually the path to freedom, we should still strive to have even a little bit of that level of endurance and motivation, willing to do that. And again, we live different lives. We live in the world. We have jobs. We have families. We can't go do things. You can't give 100% and live in a retreat in caves all the time, right? We have other things we have to do. But we have to have a mindset that is willing to give up everything for other sentient beings. Not just give it up for our gurus, right? There are a lot of people I've met, Western practitioners, who become very, I'm trying to say this in a respectful way. Guru devotion is a very difficult thing to understand. And in Tantric Buddhism, it's the heart of our practice. So it's very important. But it's very easy when you have incredible teachers who are very charismatic, who get attached to them, and to conflate your attachment with Guru devotion. Okay? And so I've met people who would willingly give up everything for their gurus, whether that's out of pure practice or out of attachment, I can't say. But then they wouldn't be able to give the same thing up for their fellow students. And the Buddha is saying we should give up everything for all sentient beings. In the same way he gave his body and his mind. And he gave all of his actions of body, speech, and mind are dedicated to others. We should be willing to do that for all sentient beings. Not just the ones that make us happy, right? And of course, I'm not saying the guru is one of the, the object of greatest virtue in our lives, the ones that teach us the Dharma, the ones that allow us to accumulate merit in so many ways. I'm not diminishing that. I'm just saying that we should be willing to give up our everything for all sentient beings. And we're not there. I'm not there. I'm definitely not there. I know that. And if I tried to do some of that, I would just get resentful, right? If I tried to give away more than I have the ability to do right now, I'd get resentful. Because my mind I haven't purified it enough. I know that there's a limit where I can give and not be resentful. And then there's another point where I say, that person should be doing better. I did all these things for them. How come they're not doing better? And so I know where that line is right now in my life. And so I'm constantly trying to push that line, because that line, it only comes from my delusions. But I'm aware of it, so I don't want to go past it, So I'm constantly pushing myself. And that's what we need to do. Recognize we're not bodhisattvas. We can't give up everything right now, but we can wish that we have the mind that wants to give up everything. And slowly, we get closer. Having given your entire Dharma body to the virtuous, you broke your physical body into fragments and attained final nirvana. So parinirvana. So the virtuous here, it's specifically saying the most supreme of suns. So at the time when the Buddha entered into, or showed the aspect of entering into parinirvana, he entrusted Kashyapa and Ananda as like the two holders of all his teachers, his lineages, of his teachings. And so Ananda was responsible for reciting all of the teachings, and Kashyapa was responsible for holding them all and preserving them. And so here, he gave his entire body to all sentient beings. But what it means by the virtuous is especially saying he entrusted his disciples to uphold his teachings and to share them with others. And then he let his physical body show the passing away, and then it became holy relics, which were then worshipped and sources of virtue for worship and devotion. So this is actually the end of the chapter, technically. The chapter on freedom from debt, and the remaining verses are kind of summary of the whole prayer, starting from verse 146. So these are also, I mean, these are all very somewhat self-explanatory, but we could go into, if we're interested, and we say the entire Dharma body. He's talking about all the holy words of the Buddha, which is divided into 12 divisions, or into 3 divisions, or into 9 divisions. So we could talk about those if you wanted to. But I think maybe, do you know what 12 branches of the teachings of the Buddha are? We say that the general teachings, the hymns and the praises, the prophecies, and so forth. Yeah, they're hard to remember. I don't remember them either. I have them written down in front of me. So, but it's easier to remember the 3 collections then. We said all the teachers of the Buddha are combined in 3 collections. What are those 3? Those are easy to remember, right?
Vinaya, Sutra,
And Abhidharma, right? So Vinaya, Sutra, and Abhidharma. So what about Tantra? Where's Tantra in those 3?
it should be in probably in Sutra.
That's your question. Tantra is often called the 4th Pitaka. So it's so we say so Rigzin, so knowledge holder. So right, we say the Pitaka, so there's the Sutra Pitaka, in Tibetan it's Dana, the Sutra Pitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, and then the Abhidharma Pitaka, and then we say there's the knowledge holder Pitaka, the Rigzin Dana. But then we also say that 4th one isn't separate from the other 3. It's pieces, it combines all the other 3 together. So it's not like a separate series of teachings conceptually. It's pieces from the other 3 all combined together, but we often call it the knowledge holder Pitaka or collection. But so when we say your entire Dharma body, all the teachings of the Buddha, we condense into those 3. So the Vinaya, it's mostly related to what it means to live a life devoted to renunciation, right? And all of the rules and regulations that it means to live a life of renunciation. And so it's important to remember when we look at rules and regulations, I know most of you won't be studying Vinaya, but you probably do study the Bodhisattva vows or the Tantric vows, which have a similar idea, is that these vows and these commitments aren't designed to prevent us from engaging in behavior we want to do, right? What it's designed to do is help us live a life of virtue, following the advice of the Buddhas. So if we look at these vows we've taken, like the Bodhisattva vows, Tantric vows, Pratimoksha vows, so you all hold, or I don't know, but presumably the lay person vows, the 5 vows of the lay person, are in line the same category of Pratimoksha vows, as opposed to my Gemon vows, right? Those vows are designed to help us live a more meaningful life. And as soon as you start looking at any of these vows or commitments as being something holding you back, then that's not a positive relationship with the vows. And you're going to get tired of them and not want to actually keep them. But instead, if you look at these vows as these are not shackles holding me down, these are breaking the shackles that are keeping me suffering. These are showing me how to live a life of virtue. So they're only beneficial. Then that makes the vows and all the Vinaya and all the other kind of commitments we take, whether they be in the Sutra vehicle, the Tantra vehicle, so much more meaningful and easy to practice. And whenever you think of the vows that may be difficult, or you think of like I know one that's very hard, at least for Westerners, is the idea that gossip or idle chatter is non-virtuous speech. You're like, oh, but who's being hurt by this, right? No, I'm not hurting anyone. It's just a little gossip. When you think the reason we recognize that as non-virtuous speech isn't to take away the fun we have from gossiping, is to realize that that's harming us. And the reason we don't think of it as harmful is because we're suffering sentient beings who've been living in samsara over and over again, and we're deluded, right? So these teachings are there to help us become free, right? So that's the Vinaya Pitaka. And then
Idle gossip, lack of is not in the Pratimokta Vow, right?
no. It's not okay, but it's one of the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? No, the Pratimokta vows are the 5 vows.
Don't kill, don't.
Excuse me, the 5 layperson vows, yeah, are.
Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't no sexual misconduct, no alcohol.
And no alcohol or other intoxicants, right? So those are the 5 Pratimoksha vows that are the layperson vows, the householder vows, as they say. And they're the 4 root vows, so not counting the alcohol, the other 4 are considered the root vows, and they're the same for all Pratimoksha levels of vows, right? The interpretation of sexual misconduct is different for ordained people and non-ordained people, but it's the same essence.
But gossip, very good. It's a thing also, a very fine line between gossip and being informed.
For being gossiping.
Informed.
Yeah, being informed, of course. But so that's what we have to check our minds, right? We have to check our minds. And then when we notice ourselves slipping between trying to find out the right amount of information so we can deal with the situation appropriately versus having non-conscientiousness, right? That's what we were talking about earlier, not having conscientiousness and just kind of wasting time or trying to find out juicy details that lead to judgment, there's a fine line and it's very easy to fall into one from the other,
But when you just correct me if I'm wrong, this Tantra thing you spoke about, where is it particular? This sounds that this came later on after the Buddha's time. That's where the Buddha coming to the core of the Is there any foundation to that?
So we say that the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, taught all the tantras. Sometimes in the aspect of Shakyamuni, but more often in the aspect of a different tantric Buddha, But then especially in this, they give timelines in the Kalachakra Tantra and some others. So the Buddha simultaneously might be giving a Prajnaparamita Sutra teaching in one place and manifesting to give a Tantra teaching in another location. So we say that from a point of view of our faith, all of the tantras are taught by the Buddha himself. And even some of them, especially in the Nyingma lineage, there are some tantras that are found as termas later on, but they were still from the Buddha himself, they say. And now if you take a Western historical academic point of view, the tantric texts historically might show that they came a little later. But that's according to what we can find for texts and how we can carbon date texts and things like this. So that's a different, from the point of view of faith, we said the Buddha taught all the sutras. But because that he didn't teach them to all students, right? And in the same way, he didn't teach the Prajnaparamita teachings to all students, that they aren't included in all the collections of the Buddhist teachings. So the Pali Canon doesn't include any of the Prajnaparamita sutras because they don't accept them as the words of the Buddha, right? Because he didn't teach those to the Sautrantikas or the Vairāgikas, right? So just because the Buddha taught them, what's collected in the Tripitaka was codified mostly by the Pali students, and then we kind of adopted it afterwards.
I think basically the people who are talking about it more it died out in popular knowledge.
What is it?
Even Buddha taught the Prajnaparamita.
Oh, yeah.
Popularly, it died out in the collective knowledge.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about what happened to be that it wasn't practiced. It was only because he only taught it to the higher level students, because the actual view of emptiness is very hard to understand.
In addition to Sadhana's question, so last week I visited Sadhana, so where I saw he gave his first sermon. So in this sermon, did he preach even the Tantra aspect?
In the first sermon, no.
So, and in what language? 2 questions, according to you, your
Yeah.
studies.
So, thank you.
Which one?
The first sermon, he taught the Four Noble Truths. So the very first sermon he taught was to the other 5 ascetics who he had been practicing with before he decided to cut his hair and to, bathe in the river and eat food again. And he taught the Four Noble Truths. And that sermon is called the wheel turning Sutra. And so that's the very first sermon he taught, was teaching the Four Noble Truths and how they work, So he didn't teach Tantra in that section. The question of what language the Buddha taught is one that is debated. And for a long time, Tibetans would say, oh, he must have taught in Pali. That's what they said. But that is very clearly not true, because Pali was an invented language that was invented by Sri Lankan scholars, especially based on Sanskrit. They're the ones that kind of codified it. And the only thing that exists in Pali are the teachings of the Buddha. And so in the last couple of years, even His Holiness has stopped saying that because he realized that modern Western scholars would say the Buddha didn't teach in Pali because it didn't exist as a language. But what language did he teach in is not clear. We know that just from historical records, the Buddha, being a prince, would have had access to Sanskrit, so he would have known Sanskrit. Never would have taught in Sanskrit because the vast majority of people didn't know it. Only Brahmins and then some priests, Brahmins and some kings and princes would know it, right? So if he's teaching everyone and he's teaching in Sanskrit, no one's going to understand him. So he didn't teach in Sanskrit. Most likely he taught, we have to figure where most of his travels were in northern India. There are a few like Prakrit languages, they call them. And so they'd be very similar. So he might teach in one language. And a lot of wherever he traveled, they may not know that exact language, but they would know similar languages to it so they could get the meaning, you know. And so you see a lot of languages that are in families together. So one of the languages that they propose, what is it called? I can't remember the name now. They don't exist anymore, but they were kind of Prakrit languages, which are local languages that are similar to what we consider Pali to be today, that like have a basis in Sanskrit, but also share things with Hindi and other local languages, so that when he spoke them, no matter where you were, many different people could understand him at once. But it's a doubt right now. There isn't a lot of the records we have, right? All the teachings of the Buddha weren't written down until after he passed away, when there were these great conventions where all the Buddhas met and they recited all of the teachings that he had taught. So they weren't written down until after he showed the aspect of passing away. And so the records we have from a historical point of view, showing the travels of the Buddha, a lot of them actually come from wealthy kings and ministers who would keep basically bank records. And so we know that when they made offerings to the Sangha, they'd have recorded in like their bank records, like made this much offering to, you know, Shakyamuni Buddha and his disciples and offered a feast or whatever. And through those records, bank records basically, or accounting records, we're able to follow a lot of the movement. Because otherwise there wasn't a lot of reason to be keeping records, you know, because keeping things written down was so difficult, you know, in ancient India. Okay, let's complete this, and then we can have a little more time. So what steadfastness, what conduct, what form, what virtue? Truly there is nothing about the Buddha's qualities that is not wonderful. So if you remember, so like I said, these last verses are kind of summarizing the whole praise. So in the very first day, we said that the praise is divided into 3 sections, right? The first 2 verses are one section, the next 3 verses are another section, and the remaining verses are the last section. What are those 3 sections?
The last is benefits.
Yeah, praise in terms of benefits, that's the last one.
First is the quality benefits and
Not qualities.
results.
What did you say?
Goals and defense.
Yeah, there we go. Results. So the first 2 verses are praise in terms of the cause. The next 3 are praise in terms of the results. And then the last, however many, so 8 or so, are praise in terms of the benefits, right? And so the causes we said especially are the 6 paramitas, but also the practices of leading to Buddhahood. And then the results, the 3 looking at the results, are the different aspects of the Buddha's body that are enlightened aspects. And then the rest of them are how they benefit sentient beings. So here, the first line, emaho, what steadfastness? Really, it says, what ability to abide in the benefit of others. So this is what steadfastness here and what conduct, that is referencing the praises in terms of the benefits. So all these latter chapters are what are being referenced in this first line here. And then what form? So what beautiful form is referencing praise in terms of the results. So that's the whole second section, right? So the form of the Buddha that's adorned with 32 major marks and 80 signs, right? And then what virtue or what good qualities? This is referencing this practice of the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas. So that's the cause. So in these 2 lines, he's summing up praise in terms of the benefits, praise in terms of the result, and praise in terms of the cause. And you know, it's not easy to do in English, but in the what steadfastness with this exclamation point is kind of the best way he can convey it. And there is no good way to convey it, but in Tibetan, the word is emaho, right? It's like joy, wonderful, how great, this kind of thing. And so the verse, it says, Emaho neha. So emaho steadfastness. Emaho truth. Emaho conduct. So it's very rejoicing and very exuberant, this verse. It's hard to kind of replicate in English. But there's nothing about the Buddhist qualities that is not one. So every aspect of the Buddha is a source of rejoicing. Even to those whose speech and actions, yet even to you, whose speech and actions are so helpful, are some and hostile. Behold the ferocity of delusion. So this is one of the few verses here in this last section, I think would be translated a little better. The first line should say, you who perform benefit and are pleasant to look upon, with body, speech, and actions all pacified, even towards you, some men are hostile. Behold the ferocity of delusion, or behold the inexhaustibility of delusion. So this is emphasizing, one, recognizing again the Buddha has pure benefit for sentient beings in all actions of body, speech, and mind. And then it's recognizing the importance of wisdom, because the ferocity of delusion, even though all you've done is work for others' benefit, there are still others who, out of their own delusions, are hostile toward you. For me, that's really helpful to remember, because whenever we do a good thing for someone else, and maybe they don't act in response in the way we expect, you say, how can someone respond to my kindness with that kind of, with whatever? Then you say, well, there are even people whose delusions are so strong, they could meet the Buddha face to face, and they were hostile to the Buddha. So of course people are going to be hostile, because that's how powerful samsara is, right? That's how powerful our delusions are. So how could I blame them because they're suffering in samsara? So if even the Buddha was, people were hostile toward him out of their own delusions, of course it's going to happen to me. O ocean of good, treasury of gems, heap of merit, mine of virtues, those who honor you are themselves worthy of honor. So really it's, O ocean of merit, treasury of gems. Here gems being the Buddha's infinite good qualities, right? Heap of Dharma, mine of good qualities and virtue. Those who honor you are themselves worthy of honor. So all of us here, hopefully, have great respect and honor for the Buddha. Does that mean we're worthy of honor?
That means they're creating small virtue.
So what do we do to recognize that in ourselves? Exactly. Rejoice. Samsara is so difficult, so hard living in samsara, that anytime we can practice even a small amount of virtue, that's a huge reason to rejoice. So the idea that we are worthy of honor because we're practicing, and it doesn't even have to just be Buddhists, right? I definitely know people in my life who are not Buddhists, but who are incredibly serve to benefit others in amazing ways, right? They're definitely worthy of honor. So whenever you rejoice in virtue, that's recognizing that honor, that we're all worthy of. As sentient beings who are trying to lead a spiritual life, who are trying to become better people, who are trying to help others. Your virtues are limitless, but my capacity to praise them is not. Therefore I shall finish, not because I am satisfied, but for fear of running out of words. Only you can measure your own qualities. Being is there beyond measure, beyond number, beyond thought, beyond comparison. I have hardly begun to sing your praise, and yet already my heart is filled with joy. But need a lake be drained before one's thirst is quenched. I really love this verse, this image, right? We don't have to empty a whole lake in order to quench our thirst. So to fill my heart with joy, thinking of the Buddhas and of my teachers, I don't even have to think of their infinite good qualities, because I don't have even that capacity. But just a small taste of the good qualities of my teachers and of the Buddha is enough to fill me with joy, right? It's a really beautiful line. And actually it's really well rendered in English as well. It's not like it's literal as some might think. More literal would be, in the same way that one does not need to empty a lake in order to quench their thirst. In that way, one's heart may be filled with joy, even though they've hardly begun to sing praise. Something like that would be more literal, right? But this is very beautifully done. Even just a taste, thinking about the Buddha, can bring incredible joy to our minds. And that joy becomes the motivation to practice, right? Through the merit arising from my good deed, born of faith in the sage, may the minds of beings now tossed by evil thoughts be free from distress and come to peace. Right? May those minds of all wandering sentient beings that are agitated by the whirlwind of negative thoughts, the negative thoughts being desire, harmful minds, ignorance, delusion. May they be free from distress. May they come to abide in relaxation and tranquility and peace. So we end by dedicating this. So that is the praise in 150 verses. So what do we think? Do we think this is something we can practice? Or is it just motivating us? How can this be part of our lives? Let's pray. Now that we've studied it. Yeah.
I get into like one verse, one section every day in the study.
Yeah, that's one really helpful way, right? When something's this big, we don't have to do the whole thing at once, right? But we can say, okay, now that I've studied it, so I know the different levels of meaning, not just the word meaning alone, but I understand the deeper levels. Then I can take 1 or 2 verses a day, maybe in my meditation, and just think about those, and I can just think about, even if I'm not going through verses, I can go through the different sections and say the idea of the Buddha being free from debt, meaning the Buddha gave everything to benefit sentient beings. He established a holy Dharma, and he gave all of his actions of body, speech, and mind only for the welfare of others, with pure equanimity, treating all beings the exact same, with no division or this non-differentiation, exactly. So if the Buddha did that, how can I repay that? And then just think of what it means to repay that debt. So even if you don't go through every verse, you can still take this practice into your daily practice, just by thinking of the topics that it brings. And then maybe taking 1 or 2 verses and just meditating on them for 1 minute, 2 minutes every day. I mean, we all have our practices, right? We all have daily commitments. We're all very busy. I know, I'm very busy too. The idea of adding anything else to our daily practice schedule can be very daunting. And so as soon as it becomes daunting, then we don't want to do it. And then we give up on it. So that's not what we want to do. We want this to motivate our practice, It's hard though. I know one time I attended a teaching at Yume. Was it at Yume? I think it was. And I'm sure many of you may have been there as well. It's quite a few years ago. And His Holiness decided to give a transmission of Mātṛceṭa. Like it wasn't scheduled, it wasn't like part of the itinerary, because I would give it transmission. And then at the end of it, he said, okay, now I expect all of you to do Mātṛceṭa every single day. And like as a consequence of receiving this transition from me. I don't remember what they were. He was teaching
Ahamudra.
he was also teaching the debate with self-grasping, that text.
Yeah, that also, and then after that or something, give a transmission of some text.
Yeah.
Tantric text.
Yeah.
Some other
Yeah.
completely.
And that was at the that was at not at Yume, but at the Mātṛceṭa, which is right nearby Yume, right? He like in 2 days or something, he gave teachings over 2 different places. But anyway, I remember when he gave that, and so I was talking to my classmates, and I said, "Oh, now you're going to do Mātṛceṭa every day." And they said, "Oh no, we don't have to do that. We're in the Geshe program." I said, "What does that mean?" And so a lot of the monks in the Geshe program have this idea that since we're studying, and that we don't have the same commitments as others, which sometimes the teachers do say. They say if you're studying full time in a Geshe program, then so if you receive sometimes some tantric initiation, there are some teachers that say, okay, for those that are studying full time, you don't have to do the sadhana every day until you're done studying, and then you have to do it every day. But right now you focus on your studies. So some teachers have said that, right? So then a lot of people just assume that goes across the board no matter what. But I remember it was like a surprise, right? When His Holiness gave that commitment, no one knew it was coming.
I think we got very shocked at British Russian, so finally everybody was like, and how is it?
No, I remember very clearly. And I remember afterwards I was sitting with, sorry, I didn't criticize myself. I was sitting with some people in Singapore with Venerable Lapten. And he was saying, oh, if we attend Rinpoche's teachings on Mātṛceṭa, we'll get this commitment, may get the commitment. Side Mātṛceṭa. I said, Venerable, you already have the commitment. You are sitting next to me. You.
Right?
He said, no.
But so that, because of that kind of thing is very easy, right? To think of adding more commitments to my daily practice. When it becomes when it feels like a chore or a burden, then that means we need to rethink about our relationship to these practices, right? And what are we doing to repay the kindness of our teachers and to practice? But at the same time, we have to be mindful. There's a story of, that there was these two monks who were studying, and they hadn't seen their root teacher for quite a long time because he'd been traveling, and he returned to the monastery, and they knew, the best gift we can give to our teacher is to our practice, right? And so while he was in his room, they were outside reciting what they've been memorizing and reciting their prayers back and forth outside of his window because this is their practice. And finally, he banged on the window and he said, "Hey, go to bed. Stop doing that outside my window." Because in their head, they said, "Oh, this is the best way we can benefit our teacher. This is our best gift to our teacher is our practice." So then they just were reciting very loudly outside his window, right? So, our practice is the best gift we can give our teacher, but we have to be thoughtful, right? We have to be mindful. And so, if we study a new text, I think it's really important to try and find ways to incorporate it into our life. That's the point of studying, right? So this is a very long prayer. Well, that's not true. 150 verses isn't that long, but it's longer than other prayers you might recite every day. So to add reciting all 150 verses to our daily practice might be a big commitment, right? But even just reciting it doesn't matter if we don't think about it. So more important is whenever we go to a new teaching or we learn a new text or something, we say, what can I take from this to affect my everyday practice? And so it might be taking a few verses, it might be taking 1 or 2 minutes a day to think of different topics in this. Maybe right before we do a longer meditation or something, just a few minutes. So any new thing we study, we need to find how is this affecting my practice? Or is this just affecting my Saturday nights? Because if all this is doing is making my Saturday nights more virtuous, that's some small benefit. But hopefully it could be bigger benefit, right? And it may be that you have, these uninformed teachers like me who aren't really able to give good advice or give instruction. But even when that happens, you can still get something from the teaching and from the text, even if you have some kind of ignorant teacher like me just kind of babbling on, right? Hopefully there's still something in the text itself that gives you practice. So that's as we end this session of studying this text, which I don't think we've studied here before at CKSL. And to be honest, I had never studied it before, this thing. And Venerable Lexo had been the one that recommended it. And when I knew we were going to start studying it, I asked him, so what, can you point me towards some good commentaries or teachings that you've had on this? And he goes, "Oh no, I've never read it." And I said, "What? Why are we studying it?" He goes, "Oh, I heard it was a good thing to study." Right? So that's how we came upon the opportunity to study this text. This must have been our karma ripened at the right time to come to this text, you know what I mean? So for that, I rejoice, because I wouldn't have had any reason to study this text otherwise. But now that we've gone through this 7 weeks of study with this text that we haven't seen before, the question is, how can this impact my practice? Right? How can this be more than something I just do inside the CKSL walls? And so I urge you to ask yourself that with everything you study, whether it be where we study Shantideva or Lojong or discovering Buddhism, anything we study, whether it's a tantric practice, anything. How can this affect how I exist in the world? How I serve other beings? How I try to live my life with compassion and wisdom? How can this help me to do that? And maybe you have other parts of your practice, like maybe everything covered in this text, you already have as part of your daily practice, right? And so maybe this specific text is not bringing anything new, and that's possible. But you don't know that until you analyze and you say, what am I doing and how can this benefit me? And so every time we study, I think that's really important. So this kind of praise is designed to inspire faith in the teachings, and through faith in the teachings and faith in the Buddha, then from that we have faith in the path, and we have faith in the path that develops the inciting kind of mind that wants to practice the path more, and wants to live in virtue, and wants to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha. So sometimes praises like this are here to help us inspire our faith, especially if we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling there's too much. This can be a great text too in that moment. Maybe not something you meditate on every day, but something you read to inspire you when you're feeling uninspired, So they say the Buddha has, 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, and we have access to not all of them in our languages, but many of them, right? So depending on our mind, our mood, what situations we're in our life, we have different teachings we can pull to help encourage our practice at that time. So the Buddha didn't teach one size fits all, right? He taught what was needed to the students in front of him on that day. So that's something I think we can remember. Even though we say we practice Mahayana, we are always doing everything with the Bodhicitta mind, and that we understand the Prasangika, understanding of emptiness, and we understand that to be the most accurate description of emptiness, of the nature of reality. And we understand Tantra being a swift path to become Buddhas in one life. Even though we know all of that, we still realize that not every single teaching is going to be appropriate for us every single day. And so some days we might need one teaching. Today I really need to focus on compassion because I'm having a lot of anger. So I'm going to make that my main practice. Some days I really need to focus on my ego because I have pride, So not everything all the time. Because we're suffering sentient beings, we're doing the best we can do in samsara, right? And so if we're always doing the best we can do, then we're repaying the debt of our teachers and of the Buddha, having established us in the Holy Land. And that's the best we can do. So, are there any other questions? Any other discussion in the last minute? If not, I thought it would be nice just to read the first chapter together. Like a lot of times when you study a text, especially when you see transmission, so obviously no one here is receiving transmission, but they start again at the beginning because that creates a connection to continue this text in the future and to make this part of your life. So it's not like we finished it and now it's done. You finish it and you go back to the beginning. So the first chapter is only 9 verses. So I thought we would recite that together before reciting the rest of our dedication for speed, okay? No faults in any way are found in him. All virtues in every way dwell in him. To go to him for refuge, to sing his praise, to do him honor, and to abide in his Dharma is proper for one with understanding. The only protector, his faults are gone without residue. The all-knowing one, his virtues are present without fail. Even the most spiteful man cannot with justice find fault in the thoughts, words, or deeds of the Lord. To be born human and encounter the great joy of the big Dharma is a chance rarer than a turtle thrusting its neck through a yoke floating freely in the great ocean. So how could I not put voice to good use now, for it is impermanent and may soon be liable to change. Though I know that the sage's virtues are beyond all human calculation, still I will recount a portion of them, if only for my own delight. Homage to you, O self-developed one, whose good works are many and wondrous, whose virtues are too numerous and awesome to define. Their number, they are infinite. Their nature, words must fail. But to speak of them bestows great good, so I shall speak much. Great, thank you so much. So we will conclude this evening's class with some dedication prayers. So page 36 of the Golden Book, we'll recite the 2 dedication prayers in English Then we'll recite the long life prayer for His Holiness, also in English. And then we will recite from this photocopy the prayer for the swift return of Kyabji Lama's Rinpoche, also in English, only the first one composed by His Holiness. So please take a moment to really think. We want all of our practices to be virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end. So we started by setting a setting a motivation at the beginning, committing ourselves to work for the benefit of others. And in that way, our practice was virtuous at the beginning. Then we studied the teachings of the Buddha, the holy path. And so our practice was virtuous in the middle. And now we recognize that through our study and our practice, we may have accumulated some small merit, some virtue, and so we dedicate that to all other sentient beings, and that makes our practice virtuous at the end, in all three ways. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of every happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And so, now moving to the prayer for the swift return of Kyabji Lama's worship. Hear this teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Stravakas and Prateka Buddhas, victorious Lotsan, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you were the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of Bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking this journey of this text with me, with the other teachers. Thank you for being here tonight. And I look forward to continuing. Thank you. Mm-hmm.